Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this legislative session preview webinar. I'm Angela Wilhelms, the CEO at OBI, and I want to start by thanking you foremost for what you do as employers and business leaders across the state. You've heard us say this before, but I'll say it every chance I get. It is a robust private sector that allows us to do any of the things we want to as a society, from funding schools and police to supporting arts or engaging in recreational activities. And that is all driven by you as our business community. So, first and foremost, thank you for that. Also, thank you for being a part of OBI. The demand for our work is growing, and we strive to meet that demand, but it is admittedly getting harder and harder. We're only able to do what we can because of members like you who invest in our work and our mission, which is to create a healthy, prosperous, and competitive economy for generations to come. And I think you'll agree that work has probably never been as important as it is right now for our state. So let's get to it. First, a couple of housekeeping things, just so you know. The webinar is being recorded and it will be available on our website. So if you have colleagues or others who would be interested in the information, it'll be posted and you can share it with them. Today's webinar is focused on the upcoming legislative session. And while it is technically called a short session, originally designed to be about rebalancing the budget or handling emergency issues, we are, of course, seeing a lot of bills on a wide variety of topics. Those bills were just getting posted this week, so the team is still going through. And as you can imagine, right now, a lot of them are still missing quite a bit of detail. So we'll share what we know as of now and continue to update you as the session evolves. In their discussions heading into session, legislative leaders have been talking quite a bit about immigration and responding to the federal administration on a variety of fronts. They're also talking a lot about the state budget. And we are relieved to see that more of them are talking about what we think is the most important issue facing them today: the need for private sector job growth and an improved business climate. But unfortunately, too often, the words and the offerings of wanting to support those things are followed by proposals that would create additional business taxes, regulations, and restrictions. At OBI for the session, we're trying to remain focused on a handful of opportunities to build more prosperity, and we will, of course, be fighting those other proposals. Eric will share in the chat our 2026 legislative session priorities document with you, which we released today after getting a better sense of what we can expect thanks to some of those early bill postings. So today, the policy team will each give a very brief and high-level overview of their portfolio and what key bills or topics they're seeing so far. We're going to cover a range of issues. It's a lot of information, but we are trying to keep it pretty high level. And then we'll open it up at the end for questions rather than doing them after each speaker. When that time comes to ask a question, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. As I mentioned, Eric will put a link in the chat to our agenda, but also other items we reference throughout this webinar, like our advocacy and engagement page, how you can track bills, etc. So the last thing I want to do before I turn it over to the team is just share a little bit about OBI's overarching priorities for the session. We have consistently been asking lawmakers to do three things, and that will remain the focus for the session. First, acknowledge the problem that we have in our state's economy. Like I said, while some lawmakers have begun to talk about the need for private sector job creation, it's still too few. The data and reports are clear. We lag the country in growth. We're losing jobs. Population is stagnating. West region inflation is higher than average. We have one of the highest unemployment rates in the country and one of the lowest rankings as a place for business friendliness. These are not unrelated issues. And yet we still have work to do to educate policymakers about the realities of our competitive landscape and economy that you all know and experience and manage through every day. Second, this is a big one, probably the central theme of the session for us: do no more harm. When you find yourself in a hole, you have to stop digging if you want to get out. Our tax competitiveness has plummeted in a handful of years, Yet there are various types of proposals and schemes on the table to increase the tax burden for Oregonians and Oregon companies. We're already the seventh most regulated state in the country, and yet there are even more proposals to further increase the cost and complexity of doing business. We are losing jobs across a variety of sectors, and yet we are allowing outlying policies and laws to further erode entire industries. Sometimes inaction can indeed be an affirmative act. So you'll hear some more about some of those threatening proposals soon. But finally, and hopefully, we want our lawmakers to truly prioritize economic and business development. We need to improve how we adopt and implement regulations. We need to invest seriously in economic development functions and programs, both from a system standpoint and a financial standpoint. We need to take real steps forward in land use and permitting improvements to help enable growth. And we need to support the assets we have with an eye toward long-term return on investment that allows existing businesses and organizations to survive and thrive. So again, we'll link to our priorities, which are all still rooted in our overarching competitiveness agenda. And as you hear updates from the team, know that, again, these are based on what they know as of today. Session officially convenes on Monday. It must end not later than 11:59 p.m. on March 8th. That's not very many days, but things can fly around the Capitol very quickly in that setting. So a lot of the bills that have been published contain little or no specific information. So important to track will be those amendments. As I mentioned, we'll keep you updated throughout the session via our weekly Capitol Connect newsletter every Monday. And I encourage you to use our website to find information, including how to engage with legislators on advocacy yourself. So with that, I'm going to introduce some of our policy team members to help provide their area overviews. We'll cover tax, liability, employment, environment, transportation, and economic development policy in their prepared remarks. And then, of course, you can ask questions about other topics in the Q&A. So with that, first up is Derek Sangston, our policy director and counsel. Derek's portfolio includes tax and budgeting, retail policy, liability issues, and the now nearly infamous extended producer responsibility work around the Recycling Modernization Act. So he's going to give us an update on a handful of those topics. Thank you, Derek.
Thank you, Angela. Good morning, everybody. I like to say that I do the tax and trash portfolio here at OBI. I'll get started. As Angela mentioned, OBI's main priority during this session is for the legislature to do no harm, and this is especially true when it comes to tax and fiscal issues. Fortunately, on one hand, the legislature can improve Oregon's tax system by doing nothing. As you likely know, Oregon automatically connects to federal tax law, which generally eases the administrative burden and costs associated with paying Oregon taxes. Due to H.R. 1, it also provides businesses and individuals with a significant reduction in their state tax burden. Our primary focus is preserving bonus depreciation and other business provisions of that law. But we also recognize that H.R. 1's changes to personal income taxes can reduce Oregon's much too high tax burden on individual taxpayers and offset the state's out-of-control cost of living. We've been quick to point out that disconnecting from the most beneficial provisions of H.R. 1 is short-sighted and would actually increase budget deficits in future biennia. Unfortunately, while that messaging has been successful in gumming up the legislature's original plans, there is still an ongoing and very serious effort to prevent revenue losses in this biennium by disconnecting. We will continue to lead a full-scale effort to prevent this from the legislature from choosing this path. On the other hand, the legislature also has the opportunity to undo harm it caused by letting the SALT cap workaround for pass-through entities expire, which we tried to prevent during the 2025 session. The 2025 bill fell victim to end-of-session chaos. We have been told it will move this session, but we do not know if it will be an extended version passed by the Senate last year or the scaled-back version as amended by the House Revenue Committee. Obviously, extending this now expired policy and improving it to allow more businesses to use it and greatly reduce their federal tax burden that without costing state revenue should be a no-brainer for public officials now claiming to prioritize prosperity and improving Oregon's business climate. There are some tax reform conversations that are starting. And so despite revenue from Governor rhetoric from Governor Kotek and some legislative leaders recognizing the need to actually improve Oregon's business climate, the conversation about taxes and especially about improving Oregon's tax system through tax reform has been flawed and is a flawed conversation. While there's an emerging conversation, especially in the Senate Revenue Committee, where two bills were introduced to discuss tax reform proposals, neither of them should be seen as serious improvements to Oregon's tax system. First, there is a concept to potentially reduce the number of taxpayers subject to Oregon's most onerous in the country estate tax, which would be welcomed by individuals and small business owners alike, except for the legislature seems unwilling to consider that proposal only seems willing to consider that proposal only if they are also able to raise the rates on the estates left paying the tax. By increasing the burden on the taxpayers left paying the tax, Oregon would likely drive even more residents out of the state. The other concept creates a retail sales tax framework without specifying the rate of the tax or the base on which it would apply, while punting a promise to reduce the rates of other taxes Oregonians pay to future legislative sessions. If passed, the most likely outcome would be Oregon would have a retail sales tax with a base similar to Washington's without realizing any tax relief. OBI is interested in a holistic revenue reform discussion, but ultimately, neither of these conversations is it. I'll wrap by touching on two bills regarding liability in Oregon. First is a bad one, which would increase liability in Oregon. This is the latest attempt to hold insurance companies liable under Oregon's Unlawful Trade Practices Act. Though proponents of the bill have a difficult time identifying why this bill is even needed due to the existence of so many other ways to ensure bad actors are held accountable, this bill has momentum. We've been working with coalition partners to show legislators that even with the concessions made from last session to this session, passing this bill would create the most punitive insurance bad faith scheme in the entire country. The other, and this is where I'll wrap after this, is a proactive bill that would ensure businesses can enforce liability waivers for simple negligence that arise out of recreational activities. It would correct a misguided Oregon Supreme Court decision from about a decade ago. A bipartisan bill would provide businesses of all types with a simple protection enjoyed by businesses in all other Western states and fix an issue that is plaguing the state's robust recreational economy. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Derek. Okay, next up is Paloma Sparks, who's familiar to many of you from her years working with OBI. She's now actually on contract with us, still handling the employment and labor portfolio for us. And so she'll give us an update on what she's seeing unfold in that issue area. Thanks, Paloma.
Thanks, Angela. Good to be here with all of you today. As usual, the employment space will once again be quite busy, mostly with us being on defense. So I'm going to just sort of walk through these quickly. Senate Bill 1505 is the Labor Board's bill. We saw two bills similar to this last session, one for the agricultural industry and one for the home care industry. This year, we see the home care industry bill back again. We have heard of a recent amendment that would narrow it to just those that are providing services to individuals with disabilities. However, the bill still gives broad authority to an unelected board to change working standards and wages and lots of other provisions that have been out there recently. So we will oppose that as just a horrible precedent. Then Senate Bill 1506 is a bill that we've seen recently where the BOLI has been chronically underfunded, and so they are looking to use the Worker Benefit Fund, which is actually a fund under the Workers' Compensation Department division, to fund BOLI. Right now, that assessment is set at the at 1.8 cents per hour. It's a tax that is paid for both by employees and employers. It's evenly split between the two. The proposal would be to increase the tax to 2 cents per hour for every hour worked. Oregon's Constitution requires that all new revenue raising bills be passed with 3/5 vote of the chamber and that they start in the House. Um, we support the funding proposal on its own, but the fact that there's a plan to run this as a Senate bill, um, the process is flawed and violates the constitutional provisions. So we will oppose it on that grounds. There is a House bill that could be utilized for this purpose instead, which would be at least one step further in complying with the Constitution. Then Senate Bill 1519 is a compromise between labor and business representatives, and particularly within the MLAC process, so the Management Labor Advisory Committee, which is evenly divided up between management and labor. In 2025, AFSCME had brought forward a bill that would have required time loss benefits. So that's when somebody has a permanent or total disability, permanent or temporary total disability. And right now, it's set at 66 and 2/3 of the workers' average weekly wage. For lower wage workers, that actually meant that they were earning less than they would have when working. The goal is to make it an actual replacement. So after a lot of negotiation, a subcommittee process, the that will raise to 75% for lower wage workers, but the replacement wages for higher wage workers will drop down to 65%. We believe this is a good showing of what MLAC can do when we are given the chance to really negotiate. House Bill 4089 is a doozy. We've seen a lot in recent years on the concept of wage theft, and essentially that's any dispute over wages. Um, and that one would impose criminal penalties of up to 5 years in prison and 125,000 penalties for any employer who has found to be have violated wage laws, so overtime, owing wages due to meal and rest periods, minimum wage violations, any number of things. Um, and those penalties would be in addition to any other penalty in law. So you could be found to be liable under Oregon's recently passed Senate Bill 426, which holds individual property owners liable, and also under this law. So we have lots of concerns. House Bill 4093 largely duplicates what's already required under existing law, that employers don't discriminate against individuals with disabilities, and that there's lots of resources out in the world to make sure that workers understand their rights. However, what is alarming is that it would require that employees could have a union representative, an attorney, or some other third party in any meeting with the employer regarding reasonable accommodation requests. That would turn what is supposed to be the interactive process into very much an adversarial process. And then House Bill 4094 would require employers to pay out accrued vacation when employees leave employment. Right now, that's based on whether or not it's in the employer's policy or their handbook, or their past practices. This would mean that essentially most employers would probably transition from an accrual system to a use it or lose it system for vacation and time off. There's some language saying that sick time is not covered by this, but it's written in a confusing way. So we'll have to spend some more time with sponsors on what they actually are intending on that. Um, then lastly, House Bill 4111 is a complicated bill. It is an attempt by the legislature to address immigration related activities. Unfortunately, The best of intentions are leading to a not well drafted bill um, because it says that employers can't retaliate or discriminate or have any adverse action related to somebody changing their social security number, name, or employment authorization documentation. The challenge with that is that for an employer, you really need to treat that individual as a new employee uh, to make sure that you are not putting the rest of your workplace at risk for a potential I-9 audit or other ICE activity. And if you have to treat somebody as a new employee, that means a lot of their benefits are going to have to restart, which has been considered to be um, an adverse action in other kinds of retaliation laws. So we have a lot of concerns there, continuing to work with the sponsors of the bill to get that written more narrowly so that employers aren't inadvertently violating the law. And that is it for me.
Great, thanks, Paloma. She'll be available for questions as well. Okay, so next we are going to go to Charla Moffett, who is a Senior Policy Director with OBI. She manages the ever exciting Energy, Environment, and Natural Resources portfolio. She also manages the Transportation Infrastructure portfolio in partnership with Duke. So today she's going to focus on the former, and Duke will take the latter when he's up next. Charlotte?
Great. Well, good morning, everyone. Uh, lots of exciting things happening in the energy and environment space. Again, fortunately, we're not seeing the kind of the kind of existential threat bills that we've seen in the past. There is one of those, SB 1541, is another climate super fund bill. Sometimes it's referred to as polluter pays. This is Senator Golden's bill. He also introduced a bill in the 2025 session. And what this bill would do is impose strict liability for climate damages, and it is retroactive going back to the period between 1995 and 2024. So it makes businesses and individuals that extracted or refined fossil fuels responsible parties that then pay into a climate fund, a super fund, and that the revenue, goes to address various climate issues, climate resilience, and that sort of thing. It's often, I think the idea, at least by the proponents, is that this is something that um, that the fossil fuel companies would be responsible for, but it is very clear that Oregon businesses and families would end up paying the cost of this program through increases in fuel prices. So there's a long list of reasons this is a bad bill, but killing this bill is among our top priorities this session. There are a number of regulatory and permitting improvement bills that we support ideologically, but so they fall into four buckets. So the first is that it's the right idea, but it actually unintentionally exacerbates the regulatory environment. The second is right idea, but the regulatory impact is negligible. The third is it's the right idea and it makes some, kind of incremental improvements in the regulatory environment. And then the fourth is that it really does make some significant improvements. So unfortunately, it's a mixed bag, and we have more of the one and two variety than we have of the three and four variety. But I think that really what this demonstrates with the number of sort of permitting and regulatory reform bills we're seeing this session is that we have started a very important conversation about that there are problems and that things need to be fixed, what needs to be fixed, and how we go about that. So that is the good news there. The 2025 session restarted a much needed conversation about nuclear energy in the Pacific Northwest. We are facing serious energy adequacy issues in the next few years. And while we didn't see any of those bills move, Representative Wright is back this session with a nuclear study bill. Normally nuclear study bills are not, or study bills are not terribly exciting, and they are placeholders and serve as a variety of things. But this really is a thoughtful approach to kind of evaluating what those life cycle costs are and those inevitable kind of cost benefit issues of nuclear power that will inevitably be part of a conversation if Oregon is going to get serious about nuclear energy. So we had hoped that we would be in the throes of negotiating a cap and invest bill this session, so that the climate protection program, it would take the place of the climate protection program. That did not come to pass despite our very best efforts. We have an active coalition that is still very engaged and continuing to probe for opportunities. We did do a lot of work on bill language last session, so we're in a good place in the unlikely event that an opportunity were to prevent itself. In the last few years, we've also seen a number of bills targeted at the critical energy infrastructure hub, kind of fuel terminals north of just on the north end of Portland, downtown Portland, on the Willamette River. There are a couple of bills that are not necessarily bad bills this session. So one in particular relates to fuel terminals needing to have certificates of liability. There are some things to be worked out still, but the good news is that there is preemption in that bill. So that would be a good thing on that bill. On HB 4129 is a low carbon fuel standard bill reverting back to the 10% standard, the 10% reduction in fuels, and we very much support Representative Bossart-Davis's efforts in that regard. There are a handful of energy or electricity regulation bills, and I will just say, without going into a lot of depth on those, we have on one hand additional regulatory schemes aimed at the electricity sector, and then at the same time, bills that limit rate increases. And our legislature doesn't seem to understand that those two things are very much connected and that additional regulation becomes more costly and, companies have to engage in rate recovery. So anyway, those are just a few of the bills, and thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Charlotte. Okay, so we've now got Duke Shepard, who's another senior policy director at OBI, and he manages our manufacturing council, but also our policy areas relating to economic development and, as I mentioned, transportation. So thank you, Duke.
Thanks, Angela. Good morning, everybody. I get to talk about a few positive things this session with focus on some economic development opportunities. One of our big areas, a big bill that we want to work on is Senator Solomons Jobs Act, which is the Jobs Opportunity and Build Ready Sites Act. We've worked on this bill with the City of Hillsborough, the Washington County Chamber, Oregon Life Sciences, and a variety of other partners since the summer, really building off of some of the pieces of the CHIPS Act a couple of years ago, notably the 1,700 acres of land out in Washington County that was in that bill to be brought into the urban growth boundary that is still out there and still not in the UGB and still not available. That's really the starting point for this bill, and it grew from there to include important expansions of the R&D tax credit to more industries, more companies with more resources available. And particularly important to us, a new provision that would create an optional for local governments opportunity to abate property taxes for 5 years on new capital equipment and machinery in advanced manufacturing. This grew out of a policy principle that was adopted by the Manufacturing Council and our board this fall. So while we maintain the principle that Oregon ought not be picking winners and losers among industries, we feel like by expanding the R&D tax credit and going for advanced manufacturing beyond semiconductors, we are moving a positive economic development conversation forward to get more holistically at the companies and industries that drive Oregon's economy. As you've also probably heard, Governor Kotek has an economic development bill that we generally support. We specifically support the administration's efforts to improve and update the Enterprise Zone Incentive Program and the addition of $40 million to industrial site readiness, which is the number that was proposed last session by advocates that we supported. And it only came in at 10 million. So we're excited to be able to support further investment in that. The areas that the governor's bill needs some work on involve permitting. One element of that bill that came from us that we borrowed from an executive order issued by the governor of Washington last year included a provision whereby agencies that didn't issue permits on time would have to issue refunds. Unfortunately, agencies pushed back on that, and that provision has now been taken out of the governor's bill. And secondarily, the fast track permitting concept, which we support conceptually in the governor's bill, as the bill is currently drafted, is not actually a fast track. It's a lot of procedure, and it's more steps to getting into the permit, into the fast track program than seems aligned with any conception of speed. So we've communicated that to the governor's office. They are working on amendments, and we hope that that element of the bill gets better as we move forward, and we'll continue to work to make it so. We are also, of course, supporting the Portland Trail Blazers in getting the state to invest in the Moda Center to upgrade that facility and to keep the Trailblazers a viable organization in the state. Other economic development bills that we will be tracking include one that was from an element from last session on industrial symbiosis, which we support, and building on a concept from Iceland called 100% Fish, which we also support. Then there are a few bills that are really more about studies or plans, such as a review of Business Oregon programs and development of a statewide trade strategy. What we don't see are really any bills that address the big fundamentals of the economics of this state. And you could hear that from my colleagues when it comes to taxes, environment, and labor. On the technical front, we do have a bill that we had last session to improve rulemaking in the state, to bring more transparency and engagement of stakeholders, business stakeholders in particular, from everything from notifications to acknowledgement of comments, to participation on rulemaking advisory committees, and importantly, establishment of an arbitrary and capricious standard that exists in most other states in some form and exists at the federal level and provides businesses and others, anybody really, to go to court to challenge the executive overreach that happens in agencies. We also continue to try to get the legislature to take responsibility for changing the limits they established several years ago on how cities can manage unsanctioned camping. We have a bill put forth and supported by Senator Meek in his Commerce Committee. It will be a very heavy lift, but it is a very important conversation that Oregon needs to have. Finally, transportation. There are a couple of bills that were sponsored, introduced by progressive environmental groups that have some elements that we are uncomfortable with. There are a couple pieces that may not be so bad, but the overall aims of those bills are probably not things that we're going to end up supporting. On the big picture coming out of the referendum, other than the legislative discussions about moving the election date for that referendum from November to May, we have not been engaged in or heard of a plan that revisits the big conversation about transportation or indicates what the lessons learned have been and how a moving forward plan might look. We did just hear from the governor yesterday that there is still this concept of a bigger table to be set to address the big picture going forward, but nothing in detail, nothing with a time frame, just kind of looming out there. So those are my pieces. I will hand it back to Angela.
Great. Thanks, Duke. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to mention two healthcare things really quickly. We do have Ryan Tuthill on the webinar as well. He's our policy manager who has healthcare workforce and some other related issues in his portfolio. But we just have two really quick ones in this space. So I'll do those and then we'll open it up to questions. Again, if you have questions, please use that Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom. So one thing we want to mention is House Bill 4147, which is sponsored by Representative Jules Walters. This creates what we think is going to be a very problematic reporting system. It mandates that the Oregon Health Authority create a statewide report to the legislature every year about employees who are on medical assistance and work for an employer that has over 50 employees. So that's a very low threshold, first of all, but also the reports are meant to include things like the cost of providing medical assistance, health benefit information, wage and hour data, and other demographic information. And so there's a very significant privacy and data concern here, how this would actually be done without tapping into a lot of complicated and often private information. So that's a concerning bill for us. On the positive side, we believe that we will see language in an omnibus healthcare bill to finally create something we've been advocating for a few years, which is a health insurance mandate review process. We are often in a situation where individual health insurance mandates are proposed and put forward on an individual basis rather than anyone stepping back and taking a holistic look at the cost and implications of those mandates on the overall system. We take them in isolation and then they sort of add up. So this will require a little deeper analysis before the legislature takes them up in the legislative process and conversation. So we're excited to see that finally moving forward. It's a small but we think helpful piece. So those are just some of the highlights. Again, there's a lot more on the table, but this is kind of what's top of mind as we read through the initial bills. And we know that there will be a lot of things evolving very quickly, especially in the first week or two of session as committees get underway. But I will pause there, and it doesn't look like we have any questions yet in the panel. Oh, there we just got one. So House Bill 4084. So Duke, this will be for you. The question is about the Joint Permitting Council. And so the question is whether we have any sense about the bill or that provision and whether it will pass. And if so, who would be on the council? So Duke, I'm going to let you address that one.
Great. So the members of the council, the way it's constructed, and make sure I have my sound on. Okay, great. It's the state agencies, ideally the heads, probably in reality, deputies or people with operational responsibility, they could pulled around that table. I understand from talking with the governor's office for a set of amendments that are going to come that will now probably include a couple economic development professionals, which my immediate reaction was that's a good idea. I think the governor's bill probably has pretty strong prospects because it's a Democratic majority, it's a governor's bill, and there are a lot of people who recognize the good policy pieces in that bill. As I mentioned earlier, though, the fast track permitting, the gap between the concept of a fast track permitting program and the implementation of the bill is still pretty wide. So what that looks like and how that gets amended or refined through the process is something we're going to be engaged in. We do support a couple of core elements of that bill, and we'll actively work to get that thing passed.
Great, thanks, Duke. We'll give it another second to see if other questions pop up. We won't belabor it. If not, we understand we put a lot of information before you, and you guys know how to find us and the team. But one thing I do want to mention is we have a survey that we're hoping to have businesses fill out. This was in our last newsletter. It'll be in Mondays, and Eric will put it in the chat. But it's just a very short, simple survey that helps us inform our advocacy around the business climate. So if you could please take a moment to fill that out. All the answers remain anonymous. It's just truly for for us to understand how people are feeling and share that with legislators. The reason it popped into my head is because the word council came up in that question, and that, of course, made me think of the Governor's Prosperity Council. So I will just mention here, because we do get several questions about this, while it is not focused on the legislature, so it wasn't a topic we raised here, many people have asked about how they can submit ideas to the Prosperity Council. A couple of things. We will be putting out information in the coming weeks as we get it from the council and those staffing that effort about how you can directly submit information. Duke will also be on point for OBI to gather information, and then we will, of course, be presenting our own recommendations as an association. So you can also feed your ideas into and through us. And that survey includes an opportunity to put some of those questions and ideas, but we'll have stuff on our website and we'll get that out to you. We know people have been interested in that topic. Okay, well, it doesn't look like there are any other questions, and that is again great. We will be on standby throughout session to help you with questions you do have. Hopefully, you are signed up for appropriate newsletters and things like that, so you can stay abreast. And our contact information is on our website, so don't hesitate to reach out with questions and hopefully heed our calls for testimony or engagement with legislators on these important topics. So with that, we'll give everyone 15 minutes back, and we appreciate you joining today. Have a great day.